G'day, Harry Houdini here from Australia, and we're working on the SU-152 from Trumpeter, which is a lovely, great big Russian self-propelled gun. Now, last time we were doing the dry brushing on the turret, and that was coming up really nicely after our effects of grime and the initial wash we put on there to get the darkness. So I'm pretty happy with that. So we'll just put that aside because that was the turret. Now, with tanks, they get grimier as you go down, so we put a bit of a wash on here to the body. That might be a bit shiny at the moment because I've been basically rubbing off some of the wash. And that's given us some of the detail that we were after on the seam lines and in the crevices and that sort of thing. So I think you can see that there. So that dark wash is a start. It's good, but it's going to get grimier. We've got a whole engine area here with inlets and exhausts and hatches and things, and you know, crew people are going to walk over that, and soot and dust and grease and grime and God knows what is going to mess that up. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. But what I'm going to do in this particular video is look at an area like this. Okay, nothing there, nothing there. Now the turret does sort of cover a bit of it, but what I want to do is explore a technique called dot filtering. And when you've got a big boring area like that, one trick that you can do is you can use a lot of associate colours to what your model is, and you can create a bit of randomness of texture and shade on a boring flat area. So what I've got here are three oil-based colours, and I've already taken those out and put them onto a piece of cardboard. Now the reason I'm doing this is you may see a lot of the oil starts to leach out and go into the cardboard, and that is part of this process. That's the trick, is especially when these aren't very high quality oils, we don't need that for what I'm doing, is we can leach out a lot of the oil that we don't want and just get the pigment. That's what we want. So now that we've got that pigment, we're going to take a very small brush and we're going to add some dots, and that's exactly why it's called dot filtering, because that's what we're going to do. There we have the tank body in close-up, because I know I've been asked to show what I do in more detail. It's often hard with the wider shots. So look, that's as close as I can go with the technology that I have, but I think we can all see that panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to try this dot filter. Okay, now I've added a bit of white to my palette, as you might see there. I've got a green, but it's a slightly darker green than my tank, slightly contrasting colour. I've got a blue, which is sort of in the colour spectrum. It's going to give me that interesting shade difference, and I've been told blue works really well against some green tanks. And I've got some ochre, and that also is sort of in the colour palette, and that will work. I mean, I could have put some rusty colours in there as well. You know, you can go berserk with just about any colour and create all kinds of effects, but these are the ones I've chosen. So let's begin. So I've got my paint. Let's add some dots. So you only need little ones, and there's no absolute rhyme or reason to this. You are being random, unlike when we did the grease and grime, and we actually had a reason for things. You know, we off the edges of hatches and along seam lines we put our grime, and hanging off rails, you know, we knew it would streak because of the weather. We've got no reason for this here other than we're trying to create a patella of different shades of colour to break up the monotony of just a single panel, because this panel just, there's nothing happening, there's no textures on it, there's not much there, it's pretty boring. So this is a trick to give a bit of life to an area that is just going to be quite boring otherwise. So there we go, there's our dots. And there we go, there's our dotty mess. Okay, so I know it doesn't look real nice at the moment, but believe me, this should turn into something quite interesting by the time we're finished. Alright, so taking a bigger, softer brush now, I'm going to use a little bit of my nice odorless thinner, and I'm going to do similar brushwork as we did to get the rain streaks out of our original wash. Remember, we put the dark wash on and then we basically washed it out with a brush with a bit of thinner on, and that gave us not only the fact we could control how little or how much wash we had there, but we could also sort of add a bit of a rain streak. We killed two birds with one stone. And the same, we put the grime in. We slathered the grime on in all the places we wanted it, but it was very overdone. Then we came in with our brush and we feathered that out, thinned it down and thinned it down until it was just little streaks. Well, that's what we're going to do here. So we take our dots and we start blurring them. I'm going to work in this direction because that's going to work for me for a bit of a sort of worked off rainy type effect. And already, I don't know if you notice, they're starting to disappear, but in their place we're just getting differentiation of sort of tones in the panel, and that's what we were trying to do. So here we go. How's that look? Beauty with this is if you take it too far you can tone it back, or if you've taken too much off, well, you just got to leave it till it dries or leave it a little while and you can add some more. Now I know my light is fighting me here, but you may be able to see the tonal differences. Not sure. Might be just too much light there. But anyhow, what we'll do is we'll let that dry and then we'll come back and we'll put the turret on top and you can see the contrasting difference of how that's made that panel look a bit weather worn and sort of splodged and a lot more interesting. That's what we're trying to do. Now, it's been some time since we put the dot filter on and it's starting to dry nicely, along with a little bit of grime that I snuck in there as well. I don't know how well that's showing up, but I've dot filtered all over this, including things like those little fuel tins. Everything's had a little bit of a dot filter just to break up the tonality, otherwise it's just all green, green, green. So I'll do some photos and run a little sequence at the end of this. You might be able to see that more clearly in the photos, because it might be a bit hard to see just in video. Photos tend to be less shaky than Harry's wobbly hands, but anyhow you'll see the griminess that's starting to come together there on the back. I've gone a bit more excessive with all the grime and the wash and also the dot filter. There's lots of stuff there, and that's deliberate because engine bays are grimy, greasy, sort of oily little areas. So that's how that's gone. But you'll see the oil cans, or fuel cans on the side, depending whether you call it gasoline, oil or fuel. But anyhow, they've really come up nicely. They've got little grimy drips down from their filler caps, and the sides of the clasps or the straps that hold them on, they were all nicely weathered there with the wash, and there's a bit of a dot matrix thing happening there. Dot filter. Goodness, that takes me back to my early computer days, dot matrix. Look that up, find out what a dot matrix is. Yes, that's back in the dinosaur days when Harry was a computer programmer. Anyhow, that's coming on nicely. Now next, I want to work my way down because that's still drying, and the oils aren't fully dried enough for me to put a dry brush over as we did with the turret. So I'll still let that dry overnight. I'd allow it, 24 hours overnight, even a couple of days before I would come back with the acrylics and I would do some dry brushing. So while we're waiting for that, I'd probably look at the wheels. Now in here you won't be able to do a lot of the vertical streaks. Well, unless the tank is totally mobile. It's been sitting there for a long time. Then yeah, then the rain would have accumulated and grime would have streaked, and you would have that sort of effect. But normally tank wheels are spinning around and the tank's on the move. So this area doesn't really get a lot of vertical lines. There's sort of a general grubbiness, dirtiness. In fact, what usually accumulates is a lot of mud. And we will do that, but not in this video. But what I thought I'd show you is that if you're going to do the sides of the tank down below in the tracks, and essentially the wheels, you really need to do those one at a time, and you need to do those respective like this. I'll just take that turret off while we're doing this. We don't need that turret. Out the way here so I don't knock off any more oil. So what we'll do is we'll work on the wheels, and I'll show you how I would wash them and then add my little dot filter and just get them ready for when we're going to add the dust and the mud later. You might be able to now see the fenders where we put the dot filters on, and with a bit of luck that very subtle effect is starting to show. I can see it here with the naked eye, and there's also a bit of added grimy, greasy sort of look to that, and that's doing exactly what I want it to do. That those great big expanses of green have been broken up with a few sort of colours in the spectrum that just look like wear and tear and spillage and well, who knows what. But to have a look in real life at any great big panel on anything, it invariably has a few different shades, and that's due to dents and dings and scratches and areas that have been worn and buffed and often repainted, and the paint colour is slightly different. So it's very rare in the real world that a great big panel will be exactly one colour, at least not on military equipment and armoured vehicles like this. That won't happen. There'll be a variety. And anyhow, it looks nice when we do that. When we break up the tonality and we sort of get those areas of interest, then the eye, it's much more interesting to the eye, and it makes the model look a lot more realistic, even if it's slightly exaggerated. But I've talked about pseudo-realism before. Alright, well, let's have a look at what I would do with the wheels. Now, the reason I'm going to do these vertically, well, actually I'm going to place the tank like so. I hope you can see that. I'll actually tip it towards you when I do it. The reason is you don't want it to drip and accumulate in one area, because as I said before, the wheels are generally turning. Unless you want a static tank effect, then sure, sit it down like this, wash and weather vertically, everything will drip down, you'll get exactly the right effect for a static and mobile vehicle. But generally, and especially for what I'm trying to achieve here, this tank's active. So what we're going to do first is I'll put on the dot filter first, because that'll coincidentally add a layer of the thinner, which is what I would normally do before I do my wash. So I'll put that on first, blur that out, and then I'll be able to immediately put my wash over the top of it, and then I'll let the whole thing set in this position so that nothing goes in any one direction. It only goes into the wheels, which is what I really want. I want to get the depth and the character of the wheel showing. So just as we did last time, we're going to make a big dotty mess. So a bit of white. We won't need a lot this time. And a bit of the ochre. And a tiny bit of that blue, just to change things over a bit. Again, all we're doing is making sure the whole thing isn't one colour. There's going to be mud on this anyway, so there's going to be a bit of a change to the whole look once that grimy mud gets on. But let's, while we're doing dot filters, we're having a lot of fun with that. We'll continue with a theme. Okay, so we've got a dotty mess, and we know that's not going to be there forever. We don't have to worry too much about that. So with our dotty mess, we're not going to go in any particular direction. What I'm going to do is just kind of feather it around, because I want to put generally a layer of thinners on there. Sorry about that, I think I bumped the camera. And we need a bit more thinners. I remember last time I've used the odourless turpentine, which is really good. If you're working in a confined space and you don't want to suffocate yourself. The only thing I found is that overnight I forgot to pack my model away because the thinners, I didn't notice the thinners, there wasn't any smell. So I've left my model sitting out on the bench, and there's obviously some fumes from it and some chemicals, and they drifted all the way back through the house and basically gave me a bit of headache in bed. So still cover up your model or close it in a room where it's not going to, the fumes are not going to drift, because although this is odourless, which means I can't smell it, there's obviously still some chemicals working here. There's something happening anyway, so just be careful of that. Alright, so this time it's a little bit of a different technique in that we're actually putting on our bases for our wash. And the basis for our wash is we want the areas covered in a little bit of the thinner to start with to help everything run into all the little corners. So those little areas of dot filter are now disappearing. They're just subtle now. They're just sort of hidden in there, and they will become more apparent later. Hopefully you can see a bit more clearly there, and you might even notice some of the dot filter sort of still being present on those wheels. But this is going to change. We've got our little panel line accent here we've used before from Tamiya, my favourite Tamiya, and we're going to pick out the details as we always do. Well, as I always do. I'm using the royal we here. So because I've got that that layer of thinners, if you've seen some of my previous videos on this, how I like to put just a smidge of thinners on the whole area that I'm going to wash, and that then helps the accent colour run right into the crevices and the cracks, and you might be seeing that happening already. Now it's probably not apparent on here what that dot filter did, but believe you me, it's there. It's just very subtle, and it's only supposed to be subtle. It's just a breakup. And I mean, in some ways you probably don't even need to do it down on your wheels, because you're going to have a lot of mud and gunk and everything there anyway, so it's up to you whether you would do that, or even if you'd be bothered with dot filters at all. I'm sort of playing with them. It's something new for me. It's not something I've done much of in previous modelling years, but I noticed it would be a good technique to break up a big panel, and that's why when I realised there was a great big green panel that didn't do anything, it didn't have much texture, and it just sat there, even though I know it was obscured a bit by the turret, I thought this would be a great opportunity to basically do this dot filtering technique and explore it a bit further. So we can do with it. Now look at that. Already I'm sure you can see how the wash just does all the work. Now I'm only going to do the running gear. I'm not worried about that big panel back there, because this big panel inside here behind all the wheels, that's going to be very muddy. They always do. I mean, you ain't got to look at photos of tanks or watch movies online, and you'll see how much gunk and mud ends up in there. So that section all in there, I'm not going to waste my time putting on a wash, because it's really hardly any point. So there we go. That's now got a wash happening. That's picked out bolt detail and the lovely sort of machined flanges and edges all inside the wheels, and that's really going to bring that alive. And even with the dust added, and even with a bit of mud splodged in there on my tracks, that's still going to bounce right out, and it really starts to make that come alive. And by doing your tracks, or by doing the wheels in your tracks in a vertical position like this, not down as that would normally be with the tracks on the ground, the wash is falling into all of the parts of the wheel fairly evenly. At least that's the hope. So that's what we're after. We're after that sort of effect. And there's a bit of a smoothing out over here. That's off camera. Well, you can't see that. Good, you didn't notice that. All right, looks great. Okay, well that's got to dry, and that is going to need about half an hour to an hour to dry. It's a lot faster because that's enamel. It's a lot faster than those oils I use. That's the thing with the oils. You've got to, once you start using oils, they really take a good day or two to set. So all those dotty effects, and if you do any sort of oil-based effects on your model, you need to allow a lot more time for them to dry to a point where you can then do another layer of work on it. But these little tricky little jars of panel line and the MIG grime that I use, they're kind of a bit more convenient because you can use them, go away, have a sandwich, cup of tea, whatever you want to do, you know, watch an episode of Neighbours on the TV. Yeah, and then you can come back and you're pretty well ready to go. You can continue on with adjusting your wash, you know, getting it just right, and that's the beauty of them. But the oils give you more subtle effects, you know. I mean, I'm stuck with whatever colour I've bought from Tamiya, and that's it for this wash, and that's okay. That works for what I'm doing here. But if I want some variety, then I can mix up my oils and make up a colour palette of exactly what I want, and that's where the creativity and that's where the uniqueness of your model is really going to shine, because you're not just using stock colours that everyone else is using. Alright, we're going to let this wash. I'm going to stop rabbiting on, and we'll probably come back in part 5 in a few days' time when I've done both sides and I've got that all looking nice, and then we'll do some metal effects and we'll do the mud effects, and we're getting pretty close to the end of this tank build. We might even sneak in some chipping, that won't take long, and then it's going to be all done. So there you go. Alright, that's it for now. Hooroo from Australia. I'm Harry Houdini, and this is my SU-152. See ya!